Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute delight to be back here today for this very special session on Islamic banking. I'm Etna Trainer, and a big thanks to the Chamber, and in fact to all of you for coming here. My guests are coming with me. I must keep on a roll here. The Silk Road has to continue here as we move. Perpetual motion. Again, wonderful to see you all here, and this panel, Islamic banking, something that of course we're all very, very familiar with. And when we look at the CIS region, really a home to a very, very large Muslim population. And that's not even the main reason why we should be looking there. It's home to a huge population when we really look around. But a very low penetration of financial services in general, and a very low penetration, surprisingly, of Islamic financial services. So we're looking at countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan as well. And we keep an eye on what's going on in Russia. And really, we're looking also at the cooperation and the connectivity between Dubai and the UAE, and looking towards that region. Now, governments, of course, are being very active in this role. The central banks are looking at what's going on, but also the private sector really, really driving this. So in this session, we're going to take a look at what can actually make Islamic banking probably more viable. Let me quickly introduce you to our wonderful panel here, who are in a great position to actually bring us up to date and tell us what's going on, the progress that has been made, the challenges that are in place, and indeed what everybody can do about it. Joining me here from the Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector, the Islamic Development Bank from Saudi Arabia. She's the Director of Advisory Services, Nida Raza. Nida, thank you so much for being with us. So Nida is here. A big welcome for Nida. Thank you so much. From the Financial Markets Committee, from the Russian Parliament, Flexible Business Solutions, the Islamic Finance Consultants, the managing partner of this, Behnam Gurbanzada. Thank you so much again, Behnam, for being with us. And again. And also from Al Hilal Bank in Kazakhstan, the Chief Executive Officer is joining us here, Prasad Abraham. So thank you so much. So our great panel here. Now, when we look at the development of Islamic banking or any financial services, I think the key thing we look at now is we look at legislation, we look at regulation, and of course we're looking at the CIS region as well in terms of investment. So the one thing we all want is an environment for investment, and of course that we come to mind, we look at regulation and we look at legislation. But they don't necessarily go hand in hand. Nida, tell me in terms of what's more important, the legislation or the regulation?
Thank you very much for the intro. You know, regulation and legislation is very important. One would argue that they need to go hand in hand. But like you correctly said, one is more important than the other. And we have examples of that. You know, let's just take the GCC, for example. We have regulation, banking regulation. We do not have legislation in many of these countries, actually all of them.
That surprised me, actually, because I would have imagined you say they go hand in hand, but not necessarily.
Yeah, because the problem with legislation is that, one, it has to go through so many layers of bureaucracy and you know, discussion and approval, and then it becomes law. If you break the law, you are fined, and you don't have any room to maneuver. As you know, the Islamic banking industry is still nascent, and it is developing on a daily basis. Changes, you know, trends, all of those things. So if you have it into law and you break the law, you'll be fined, and there's no room to maneuver. Regulation, however, is slightly easier, because you can have the movement or changes in regulation is much easier and faster. Absolutely, you must have regulation in the country, because otherwise, how is the central bank going to know how to regulate you as an entity? Because the way you behave, you know, as an Islamic bank or a Islamic financial institution behaves on paper, on accounting, on supervision is a little bit different than how you do your regular conventional banking and financial institutions. So they need to be able to understand how to treat various things and how to supervise. So regulation is paramount. Legislation needs to be, if at all, needs to be a guideline pointing to Sharia law as the basis for the law.
We'll certainly come back and explore that in a little more detail, because I find that absolutely fascinating, as I'm sure many of you do too, and it brings into account some issues of governance as well as that too. But I'd quickly, Behnam, if I can come to you in terms of looking at the situation in Azerbaijan at the moment. How there's no legislation in place there. regulation, maybe perhaps. But there is a little bit of progress here. So bring us up to date in terms of what has been happening with Azerbaijan in this maybe slowly approach towards Islamic banking.
Thank you. You know, up to date, we had very good experience in the country within the biggest bank, so we did good achievements. Up to date, the state is working closely with Islamic Development Bank, so the working group and the consultancy council is created, set up in Azerbaijan, and they're trying now to work out the regulation and the legislation for the country. But the workflow, it's not too fast, and they're trying to be...
Not too fast, that means it's slow. Is that
slow.
correct?
It's slow. They're trying to be...
It's a nice way of saying that. They need to catch up.
Okay, it's good. It's slow. Why? Because 6-7 ministries, they're in a working group and each trying to develop their own area. It's like a taxation, it's Ministry of Financing, Economic Development, the central bank, and it's developing.
But isn't that life? I mean, you know, come on, they've got to be able to, you know, look at this, and this is what every other country has to go through, and every other banking sector, conventional or Islamic, and they've got to be able to talk to all the different ministries, to the central bank, you know, to the various stakeholders who are going to do this. So it's not surprise, oh, this is going to be tough, it's going to be a bureaucratic nightmare. You know, get on with it, everybody else does.
They will do it now because the crisis helped them to do that. You know, before this time when we have high oil prices,
Yes.
we've been a little bit lazy, but now we have to think another way. So we have to be more focused on the real business. We should be focused on real banking and the relations between the clients and the bank. So now banks to be more focused on clients. So it should be like a participation and the client-based banking.
Well, we'll come back. I mean, both of these great topics that we do have to explore a little bit more. But Prasad, I want to bring you in here at this point. Al Hilal Bank, a big brand that we're all very familiar with here, and making great strides in Kazakhstan. One of the first movers, and in a way, a pioneer. That you went into Kazakhstan, what, 2010, I believe? And at that time, you were really the first bank that went in there, and in a way took a huge risk. Tell me, why did you do that? And why did the bank think that this was a bright thing to do, strategically wise, you know, a smart thing to do? Because you're not a charity. You need to go in there and you need to be sure that this is good for your stakeholders and that there is going to be a profit at the end of the day and people are going to be happy. And also that you're going to find customers.
Thank you. By way of quick background, Al Hilal Bank is 100% owned by the government of Abu Dhabi. It was established in 2008, and at a relatively young age, we were given the opportunity to go to Kazakhstan. The question was why? One of the reasons for creating Al Hilal Bank was also to demonstrate that Islamic banking is not traditionally boring, old-fashioned. It can be progressive, dynamic, and still stick to ethical values and deliver the proper professional services. With this in mind, one of our principal reasons was that we did not want to go through the conventional role of expansion. We would have liked to go somewhere where nobody else had gone before. We researched...
But even that move is a very brave move, and for a new bank.
Absolutely. It was when the plans were hatched when the bank was less than 18 months old. We went in there. There were a few persuasive reasons. Kazakhstan is a large country, 70% Muslim population, and at the same time, we went there in 2010 at the height of the financial crisis. 3 of the top 10 banks had virtually bankrupted, and the government had taken over. At the time we went in, we didn't know how much further the crisis had to go. But being bold and decisive occasionally pays its dividends, and fortunately, we went in at the bottom, and there were other challenges. What do you do for staff in a country where there is no Islamic banking before? We managed to find a good talent pool, got about 60% of our staff came to Abu Dhabi, trained them completely, and frankly, the results have been excellent in the sense that our Sharia board tells me that the level of Sharia understanding amongst the Kazakhstan staff in general probably equals and in many cases surpasses what we experience in Abu Dhabi.
Well, what wonderful way to overcome that challenge and take the time to bring the people. I suppose they were very eager. Here's a bank that's taking a big chance, probably good jobs, and I love the way you put in his little marketing there. The bank was bold and decisive. You know, it's, what is it? Al Hilal Bank, bold and decisive. Well, well done. Let me come back to this issue, you know, Anita, if you might address it too, in terms of the bureaucracy involved and maybe the hurdles that Islamic banking might face rather than conventional banking. And again, is that the deal breaker for, you know, industry sometimes and for shareholders to actually come in and maybe decide one or the other?
Yes, certainly. Certainly, you need to have the parties aligned, and you need to have the education and the applicability of that environment. Because in order for any financial institution to thrive, it needs to have the environment in which to be able to do so. So you need those. You need the government to be behind it. You need the central bank to be behind it, and you need. You need to have the demand, and if any one of them is missing, you'll find that the development will be slow. And it's not just, this is a fad, everybody else is doing it, let's do it and see where we go. If you decide to go in it, it's for the long haul, because there are a lot of changes that one needs to do, and from the government level, at the central bank level, because, you have to educate. Because, one would argue, you could call it in some countries non-interest banking or participation banking, as they call it in Turkey. And people start thinking, oh, okay, so they're not going to charge me interest? It must be free banking. But guess what? It's not. As we all know, it's not. And so we need to educate the staff. We need to educate the government, and the government may know, but we also need to educate the users of the Islamic bank. So we need to educate the SMEs, the corporates, as well as the customers. And that education needs a lot of marketing, a lot of effort.
I see you both totally agreeing on this and smiling, thinking free banking. Is this something that you've encountered before, that your general stakeholders, your audience, your customers think they're getting a better deal? I'll go with you first, Neha.
Yes, it's commonly done, and I agree with Neda that it's, especially in Kazakhstan, as the first mover, it is our responsibility.
Yes.
And what we have done specifically is every 6 months we have a Sharia board meeting in Kazakhstan, and even in the middle of winter they have braved it out there. And one of the Sharia board members stays back, and we arrange special educational sessions. We target a broad spectrum of society. We start with university students. These are the CEOs and CFOs of tomorrow. We tell them the rules are quite clear. The Sharia member is not supposed to advertise for Al Hilal Bank. He merely tells them about an alternative form of banking, which they can consider when they graduate. And we're often impressed by the level of interest shown by these students. Auditorium, we have up to 300 to 400 students coming after class to listen to these sessions. So we target students, we target university lecturers, we specifically have sessions for ministries and regulators, because they are the ones who supervise us. They should have these. We then do a session for corporate CEOs and CFOs, not our customers, but those who would like to know about these. All of these still reach approximately 1% of the population. So during the last 2 sessions, the Sharia board members have now targeted the imams of each region. So we had, on one occasion, about 400 imams from the Almaty region. And then they, during their Friday sermons, would let the customers know about what Islamic banking is. It's an expensive proposition, but we believe that this is the best way to reach out and give correct, proper understanding so that it will grow from there.
Behyam, if you come in here, when we look at the region too, less than 1% is you've got them involved in Islamic banking. So the customer base is so low at the moment, which on the good side means that customer base, the potential is huge. Let's take a quick look over in Russia, because you were also advocating there and you're working very, very closely there in terms of putting in place. They're looking at legislation, they're looking at a law, but they've just begun to look at this in 2015, so only a few months ago. How has it taken them so long in such a diverse country to actually think maybe we need to start looking at Islamic banking?
As you know, Russia is the biggest country in Eurasia with Islamic population, so more than 25 million Muslims living in Russia. In 2015, we had a great chance to present our Islamic banking model within the Russian parliament. It was a round table and was invited by distinguished guest, Mr. Savelev. He is also in our board, and so he invited me to present this model and to discuss the opportunities, how we can involve and implement Islamic banking, Islamic financing in Russian Federation. So we make the first step in Parliament. We work together with this committee. We draft the first business model and let's say the strategy, which could be used for further implementation. And last year, the first 3 clauses have been drafted and presented to the Financial Committee of the Parliament, and now the Parliament of Russian Federation addressed this draft legislation to the Ministry of Economy, Finance and the Central Bank. So working group is now working very hardly. So we're meeting each month in the frame of consultancy committee within the Russian Parliament. So we meet with the central bank people, we meet with the top players as a Sberbank, as a VTB and other banks. So we met the people from regions, from Tatarstan, from Chechnya, but we mainly focused on Russia, like in Moscow, to the center, to present this new type of Islamic banking legislation through big banks to the parliament with the support of the financial committee of the parliament.
Nida, you want to come in particularly on this point?
Sure. Just to address your question, let's just look back. The fact is that when Islamic banking first came into the foray, it was all about the Arab states, it was all about Malaysia, maybe Indonesia, it's for them. After the crisis, it became very evident that Islamic banks were able to weather the storm. So people started looking at it saying, okay, one would argue that, okay, it's you change interest for profit and suddenly you have Islamic banking, so that must be what it is.
But it's
guess
not
what?
that simple.
Exactly.
When
people started studying it, okay, you know what? This is an alternative form of banking. It's not necessarily Islamic. It's just an alternative form. It happens to follow Sharia laws, which at the basics is ethics. It's not encouraging over leverage. All of those sorts of things that everybody knows about. But that's when the spotlight came in. It wasn't until 2010 that everybody else started looking into it and started saying, okay, we need to find an alternative form of banking. It's no longer a fringe instrument or a fringe kind of way of doing things. It's mainstream, and it needs to be brought into our countries, and that's what I think made a lot of countries focus on it.
Prasad, did you have that experience too, particularly after the crisis and now with the additional crisis in terms of the oil price at the moment here, that people are beginning to look at it? And we see the growth of Islamic banking around the world, in major, almost non-Muslim centers around the world too. We see the growth of Islamic banking in London, for example, too. In Europe as well. So again, are people looking at what the bank does and how the Islamic bank conducts business and looking at the governance within there? Is that enough to actually differentiate yourself to a point where Islamic banking will therefore grow and develop?
In fact, our reaction has been rather mixed. Within Kazakhstan, and I suppose most of the CIS, it's an extremely regimented form of approach to banking, as with most other businesses. So in traditional situation, a bank has been used to getting a term loan agreement from HSBC, and you would have a similar structure with a local bank. But suddenly the first Islamic bank comes in, and we say, okay, we buy something and we sell it to you, and they say, no, I want money, and this is the kind of contract that I'm used to. During our first year, my legal team spent more time in client offices telling them that this was an acceptable way of doing business. The client's legal department flatly refused to endorse the transaction, and we then had to persuade them as to why it is. We made small successes, but the most reassuring factor is the level of repeat business. Once they understood the contract and they had it, and of course, we tried to compensate with services, but really, our retention rate has been much better than other customers. And now, of course, over a period of time, we've established credibility. I can quote other people. But the first few years was a huge challenge.
But when you look at your position in the region at the moment, you started with 3 centers.
Yes.
You've still got 3 centers. So you're not on a growth trajectory in CIS at the moment. I mean, tell me why. You're obviously doing well with what you've got.
Within Kazakhstan, for our type of business, I do not need a broad footprint. From the major centers, I can serve my current customer base. Al Hilal's objective was we'd go into Kazakhstan, test the model, and if it's successful, we would branch out into other areas of the CIS. Unfortunately, in most other cases, legislation has not reached the level which we consider acceptable. And being a government-owned institution, our rules are very clear. No legislation, no presence.
Wow, so we come back to regulation is nice, but you need the rubber stamp, you need legislation
in such
there.
countries, it's absolutely necessary from our point of view.
So please, you're dying to get in here. So especially if there's a message there, if any country wants Al Hilal Bank in there, it's like legislation or you're not going in. Fair enough, that's clear.
It was a little bit different in Azerbaijan because when we started to speak about Islamic banking in the country, so we heard the first bell, so we don't need it. So why? We don't need it because we have our own conventional banking, so we have relations with other clients, we have relations with our financial institutions, but we offered to do something new and to diversify the source of financing and the way of making banking business.
So what's your
we show them practice.
What's your marketing out there that says, because ultimately the customer is looking for, I would say, the best deal.
The best deal today, Islamic banking is a participate banking, so we take the risks. We take the risk and we're trying to have the relations between the client and the bank on a partnership basis. So we're not trying to, as Prasad said before, so give loans with the interest and say, guys, I don't care about the time, I don't care about the business, just you have to pay just in time with your interest and the principal. So we're trying to be with the client from A to Z.
Now, I would argue that conventional banks talk a lot too about being partners. But Islamic banking has also taken that brand. I want to briefly sort of address this concept of participatory banking. So in many countries, there's a different brand there, and there's a different perception. And as you talk about being partners, now EY had actually done a lot of work on that, and you're familiar with that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that growth, again, of the new brand of Islamic banking?
Sure. Islamic banking took off where everybody, specifically the GCC and many banks around the world, they would open windows and they would call it the Islamic window, and they would have the word Islamic in there. Over time, as we know, people realize that sometimes people, when they see Islamic, they tend to think, oh, it's only for Muslims. Well, Islamic banking is not only for Muslims, as we all know. It's just an alternative form of banking. One could argue in its purest form it should be the better way of banking, but that's a whole other story. So what we found is that you needed to separate, in many countries you need to separate religion from civil kind of way of doing things. So,
and I think that's without doubt. You look back in history and you look back at, probably the Presbyterian banks or the Protestant banks. We don't find them really anymore.
Yeah.
So that's also, I think, part of development, because you realize you have got a wider mix in the population and you need to engage them.
Exactly, and on top of that, you have Islam having, the extremist view in some media roles, with all these extremists and terrorists and all these sorts of things happening. When you start seeing Islamic banking in some countries, the natural population shies away from it because they feel like their money is going to fund something that they're not comfortable with. And so they separate that completely. So you take Turkey, they call it participation banking. Take Nigeria, they call it non-interest banking. And they're very careful about that. from the government down, all the way down to the players themselves.
Beham, if I can come back to you, coming back to Azerbaijan, and the fact that you were talking about there were almost gaps in the law that allowed Islamic banking to begin. Actually, it may not be thriving, but the seeds are there and the openings were in place, and the Islamic people, the bankers, got in there. How can that now develop, and what can we expect when we look towards the next few years?
We showed how to do it, and nowadays we're planning to convert one local commercial bank to full Islamic.
Okay.
We're working together with ICD Kazakhstan office, so we already apply for technical assistance, and we're planning to do the first, let's say, iBank without the office. It will be only one head office, and all services will be presented by best solution through the internet banking and through the mobile banking. So it will be the new generation Islamic bank, which will allow to all clients to use our services, products, based on internet banking and online banking operation via the mobile phone, smartphones. And it will be supported by the digital sign and by digital documentation outflow, which already implemented with Azerbaijani state.
I mean, that is wonderful to hear, because one of the criticisms that I've read in many reports about Islamic banking, and Prasanth, you've already said that you're brave and dynamic and all of that stuff, but one of the criticisms have been that the instruments are not there, you haven't gone digital, that it's not ease of use for the customer. So what you're doing, you're saying that you're going to have one complete bank.
Yeah, we're
an e-bank.
digitalizing, let's say like this. So we do something new and some new digital Islamic banking. And we're planning to implement this bank, first of all, in Azerbaijan, and then using our experience to step up to the regions, like to Russia, to Kazakhstan. Even today we have very good meetings in Dubai. We will present our model also in Dubai.
Okay, we'll be looking forward to that. Prasanth, when you're talking about, I mean, your bank has won many awards in terms of digital, technical, all of that. How have you brought that, to bear? Even though you're not a customer bank or you're not a retail bank, you're still very much in the business to business and government. But how technically proficient is your banking right now?
Compared to what we offer in the UAE, I should admit that we are rather behind in terms of customer product offerings on the technology front within Kazakhstan. Partly because a number of these initiatives are largely directed towards the retail population. That's
Yes.
where digital platforms and mobile banking, etc., make the big difference.
But when you're talking billions of dollars, you probably don't need to do it mobile.
Well, it's
face-to-face is
we
a good
do have,
idea for
no,
the bank.
we have PC-based applications, but the true mobile innovations, I don't cater to that customer base at the moment. We have plans, and we have done a review to look at addressing the retail population. And when that happens, we will bring the full capability of our UAE product offerings into Kazakhstan, and it will be, we hope, a very interesting opportunity for the Kazakh retail space.
Are we seeing a shift in that? I mean, when you think of it, you look at your new customer base and you talk about educating the university students and bringing them into the fold. Your new customer base, whether we all like it or not, is very mobile. And they're not going to be content, even when they are leaders of industry, doing that. Are you seeing that shift?
Yes, for ICD, one of the main development goals is for us to try and be financially inclusive in the countries that we go and invest in and that we go and help, including our member countries. So naturally that would appeal to the SME sector. And we feel that in order to reach the maximum number of SMEs, you need to have that digital platform available, because overheads and operations are very expensive for SMEs, because the ticket size for every transaction is quite small. So in order to be efficient and in order to keep costs down, digitization is an absolute must across the world, but specifically in some of these larger countries, and where you need to reach these remote entities in order to be able to lend to them.
Well, now I'd like to invite our audience to please share some questions with us. If anybody would like to come to the podium here, by all means. My high-tech gadget here has let me down just a little bit, so if somebody can perhaps come and help me here and get me back online, I might be able to take some questions. But by all means, if there's any questions from the floor, also looking at the potential for great business, in CIS as well, in terms of the business and the potential that's there. 1% of a population banked when it comes to Islamic banking. So there's 99% to go. I mean, this is an incredible opportunity here. I want to talk about, though, investment opportunities. So it's fine, the banks are in place, but me as a customer, what are you looking to fund? What are you particularly with the bank? What are you looking at in terms of investment opportunities? Agriculture, infrastructure. I mean, where's the move? These are societies that are also on the move, so there must be big funding on that. Thank you, Simon. Sorry about that.
Yes, certainly. There is a dire need of infrastructure development in some of these emerging economies, and specifically being landlocked, and with all the things that are going on around the world, with Iran having its sanctions lifted, etc., we need to create a swift and very operationally efficient flow to be able to reduce some of the times that takes for one thing to reach from one part of the world to another, especially around the CIS. So there is the requirement to do a lot of development on the infrastructure side. That's one. Second is many of the countries in the CIS region naturally lend themselves to agriculture. They have a lot of land, they have a lot of fertile land, and I happened to be in Kazakhstan not so long ago, and I met a German farmer who was looking at investing in dairy production in Kazakhstan, and he was saying that it's not about the cow or what you feed it, in terms of grain, but the grass that grows. He said, I have not seen the quality and the fertility of the soil anywhere else. And this is, German guy has been doing it for 30 years. So there is a lot of agriculture investment that needs to happen. Now we all know, food security is like a hot topic around the world.
Huge, and we just actually finished a big UAE conference on food security, so
exactly.
They'll all be heading there, keeping an eye.
So FDI is very important in these countries, and actually will be welcomed, because everyone's trying to move away from with the recent oil crisis. You're trying to diversify your economy. Now, one of the best ways to do this, and ICD has done a lot of help in member countries to do that, is you have to look back at your investment code, and you have to look to see if you can provide a special economic zone concept in your country, where you can provide some concessions to those people that are coming into your country, so that you can give them incentive to come and develop your country and develop your economy, but also provide for the local farmers some transfer of knowledge, some upskilling.
Yes.
So that you're trying to do both things. You're bringing in the foreign direct investor, he is benefiting, your own economy is benefiting, your citizens are benefiting. So, but you need to be very careful of how you devise these special economic zones and these investment act, to make sure that you as a government is not giving something away for free for too long. And we've advised many governments around that, and we've helped raise funding to be able to get these studies on and develop it and look at what works and what doesn't work in many of these.
In Azerbaijan, Behman, who can you help as the investor, and where do you see the appetite is coming in terms of what are they looking for? And again, where can Islamic banking actually help to fund projects, particularly maybe in these areas, but perhaps outside of these areas also?
In Azerbaijan, the most attractive area is now infrastructure financing, it's agriculture, as well as the education. So education now, the state and the government, they pay very specific attention to the education area. And even, we received some offers from one of the topest universities to set up Islamic economy business school in Azerbaijan. Yeah, in order to prepare our local staff, to prepare our local professionals. But this is a little bit long-term project, because the education is no high rate return, But anyway, we consider it as very important for us. And as I told before, infrastructure to develop the regions, to develop the real business opportunities in the regions, to set up the factories, to set up the agriculture centers, as well as the logistics centers in the country. So we're more focused on this type of services.
Prasad, your business, particularly with governments and the bigger players, what are you funding? I mean, is it infrastructure? Is it logistics? What can you do, and how do you specifically help these big players that perhaps conventional banking couldn't?
Yeah, I'll address the second part of the question first. And this is very important because Al Hilal is owned by the government of Abu Dhabi. One of the key KPIs for me and for my management is the extent to which we offer assistance for UAE companies who wish to set up in Kazakhstan. My chairman tells me that whenever he submits the reports to His Highnesses, one of the big questions that he asks, they see the numbers, but how many businesses have you helped? And that is a very key ingredient. Today, we have Mubadala is in Kazakhstan. Aldar is constructing what will become the tallest building in the CIS. Arab Tech is the contractor. And we, of course, have Etihad and we have Fly Dubai. Yes. But these are the big names. The real people who need help are the small SMEs who want to establish something in the oil services industry. If they come in on their own, they could get lost with the language, with the requirements, and other aspects. We've been there 5, 6 years. We know the ropes. We know what they should do, and more importantly, what they shouldn't.
So are you facilitating foreign direct investment, or you're also working within the country?
Oh, certainly. We do work. I have a customer base, but one important aspect of my business is to encourage, and even if it is a purely investigatory visit from the UAE, we are obliged to provide all necessary assistance. Dubai Chamber organized some visits last year. They have been extremely interested in these areas, and at all of these meetings, Al Hilal has been there to offer the kind of assistance that's necessary.
I'm going to keep with you just for a moment, just to address some questions we've had here, and a few of them actually came directly for you, and even though we have talked about the fact that you're very happy where you are and you don't have expansion plans at the moment, there's a few people in the audience that would actually like to know when you're going to take a shift, or at least a look, to Kyrgyzstan.
I suppose it's a difficult question. As I mentioned, the one prerequisite is the fact that there has to be proper legislation in place. And also, one cannot hide the fact that these are, most of the CIS is commodity-based countries. Yes. And many of these countries are going through a stage of financial distress at the moment. 4 years ago, when I made a similar presentation to investors in the UAE, I had a chart which showed GDP growth of Kazakhstan, UAE, and the United States. Kazakhstan was growing at 8 to 9%, UAE was like 2 to 3%, and United States was 1%. But today, many of these CIS economies, Kazakhstan has gone to less than 1%, the currency has depreciated 50%, so there are real challenges. Azerbaijan has some serious currency issues as well. So, yes, we are a government institution, we have interest in expansion, but at the same time, we also have a responsibility to our shareholders. There has to be some degree of economic stability before we can make such ventures. So the decision of the board is, at the moment, do not talk of any expansion plans. Stay where you are, try to consolidate and survive, and once the environment becomes a little more predictable, we have not abandoned it, but we will certainly look at it. But 2016 could be a challenging year in terms of which direction we go.
And also any other countries you might be looking at? We
certainly, Azerbaijan, when they had the regulation in progress, we certainly had active cooperation with Benham and his team. We believe that as the first mover in CIS, it is my responsibility. The board has approved a special budget to be able to offer assistance to such initiatives because, again, because the shareholder is the government, the motive is not purely profit. We would like to spearhead the growth of Islamic banking in the proper way across the CIS.
Following from that, Behnam, and we have a question from a member of the audience too, that IFC has just made research on potential of Islamic banking in the Kyrgyz Republic, the big potential there, obstacles with special regulations, with the national banks, looking for cooperation. Any suggestions what to do in that situation, particularly with the Kyrgyz Republic?
Interesting question, to be
So
frank. I never
IFC
been to
made
Kyrgyz,
research on the
but-
potential of, yes.
Yeah, the potential of CIS markets is, first of all, to present right legislation and regulation. As Prasad mentioned and Nida mentioned, so the regulation and the legislation, this is the main Atlantis of the Islamic banking. So if central bank or any other regulator is not able to regulate this activity, it will be very tough in the future to develop. We saw it in Azerbaijan. So we grew to the limit. So we attracted a lot of investors outside of the country. So the biggest players such as Dubai Islamic Bank, Nur Islamic, now it's Nur, Al Hilal, Abu Dhabi Islamic, the big players, they played in Islamic banking market in the country. But now we saw, so the next step should be legislation. In Kyrgyzstan, I suppose they already made some steps in the legislation issues. They already prepared something in regulatory issues. But now it should be more focused to cooperate with IDB and ICD, to cooperate with their technical assistance team, and to set up the right legislation base. After that, they will be very, they can implement the practice of experience of Al Hilal in Kazakhstan and to do their business. So what did we do first? We came to Kazakhstan, I met Prasad, and I asked, what will be your advisors? Because now we're starting in Azerbaijan. I received very good help. I received very good advisors for the future. And now, we see the model which is working in Azerbaijan. And this will be implemented in Russia next year.
Good. And you want to comment this in particular,
Yes,
comment on this? Stay with it.
Just to complement what you're saying, actually the governments of Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan have actually visited us in Jeddah, both IDB and ICD, and have provided us comfort and commitment that they are in this for the long haul, and they are very, very interested in Islamic banking or Islamic finance in their countries, and they have requested for assistance. Both on the technical side, so that the government can provide adequate regulations and to the extent required legislation for the environment to operate, but also interested parties like the banks in those countries have approached us for assistance to help at first maybe do some windows, Islamic windows, just so they can get a taster of how to operate, and others have asked for a full-fledged conversion from a conventional bank to an Islamic bank. And we're looking at many opportunities right now. In fact, in Tajikistan, we were in the middle of doing a conversion. So there's a lot of interest from the operators themselves, as in the banks in those countries. And now the government is also focused. So we expect things to move rather fast.
And I suppose with that interest, that heightened interest, what would be the possibilities, and perhaps the three of you could maybe quickly comment on this before we wrap it up, we're near the end of time, the prospect of a sovereign sukuk, present in any of the countries, particularly for yourself?
We've been in active discussions with the government of Kazakhstan about the issuance of sukuk, right from creating the structure, how it has to be done. Our Sharia advisors met with the Ministry of Finance. Obviously, they had serious questions about how things worked. We have been interested, and there has been a very key shift of attitudes. At one stage, Kazakhstan, they did not have significant borrowings.
Yes.
As a state, they were in surplus, they did not need the money. But we wanted them to demonstrate their commitment to Islamic finance by at least issuing a token sukuk. One senior member in the Ministry of Finance said to me that if I want to issue a Eurobond, it will take me 2 phone calls, and in 2 weeks, I'll have the issue. If you guys want a sukuk, I have to prepare so much documentation, I have to give you security, you take my roads, you do all sorts of things, why should I bother? But not the same official. Today, the financial situation is a little bit difficult, and they are actively engaging in discussions about possible sukuk. We still have a number of hurdles to cross, but I would not be surprised if Kazakhstan has a sovereign sukuk in 2016.
Okay, Behnam, what's the situation in Azerbaijan? I see you agreeing there.
It's pretty same, so
Yes.
state doesn't need any additional funding, so everything is in place. The only thing that Sukuk is considering as a something, the next step for development Islamic financing in the country. And to be frank, the main and the significant issue now is the legislation. So we're more focused on legislation to implement it, to finalize, and after that we could discuss about the sovereign sukuk.
And again, when you're looking right across all of the region, and again now, getting those inquiries, what do you feel? Do you feel that there's a possibility down the road?
There is a very, very renewed and urgent interest for everyone to issue in 2016. Again, some of them have the perception that if they issue a sukuk, they're suddenly going to get a pricing which is, 2% below where they'd be able to get their euro bond. But that's a whole other story. The market looks through. The credit is the credit. The documentation may be Islamic, but the credit is the credit. What's important, though, in the structuring is that there needs to be, if there's no sukuk law in that country, there needs to be at least a securitization law. Because we can use that on the basis on which to do the structuring. If that is not there, then we can have serious issues in terms of delay in embarking and not being able to issue.
Now, one question, and forgive me, I didn't get round to, and we're not going to address it at this point, but it was, how important surely the conventional banking, getting that in place, is probably more important than moving on towards Islamic banking to do that. I don't necessarily want to totally get caught up in this, but the conventional banking and Islamic banking, should we be pushing them both together, and is there room for both, or can one do better than the other? There's a question here saying, and I want to round it up on this, so your just thoughts in terms of the future of Islamic banking, and again, I want this in just 30 seconds from you.
I suppose most of the audience will know that Islamic banking, still in the overall context of world banking assets, it's still small. But what is extremely encouraging is that Islamic banking growth is almost 1.5 times the growth size of conventional banking. So there is traditional hope. And obviously, I think the two can completely work together. These are not against. And I don't know how many of the audience knows that the first Islamic bank in the UAE was Dubai Islamic Bank,
Yes.
which was established in 1976. And for a long time, that was the only Islamic bank here. Then the next bank came in the 1990s. And when the second bank came, everybody said, this is it, competition is going to kill. But interestingly, once the second bank came, the growth of Islamic banking was phenomenal. Until then, it was a concept, but once both came, it was a reality, and the growth mushroomed since then.
Right.
So we see tremendous hope, both for conventional and Islamic. We don't work against each other, but Islamic certainly has great prospects.
Your thoughts on that, Behnam?
Yes, the opinion is the same. The only thing that Islamic banking today should cross the borders. We should cross the GCC. We should cross those countries where we see only potential Muslims societies. We should be in the markets where conventional bankings are today. So we have to compete on their fields with our services and high-class products. So we have to be, more transparent, more flexible, and to be more client-oriented. Not Muslim client-oriented, but whole Muslim-oriented. In Azerbaijan, when I worked previously in Islamic Bank, in IBA, so from 100% of our total clients, only 6% they were practicing Muslims. Other were international companies, those the foreigners who are living in Azerbaijan. So we took with our services and products. So this is the future, I suppose. We have to be more flexible.
Nida, I mean, in terms of the growth that's there and the potential.
Yeah, just to wrap up, it has to be customer-centric, and you have to compete on services and service level and customer level. So you have to follow your customer, whether you're in an Islamic bank or a conventional bank. You need to be able to provide the best of services, then it won't matter whether you're conventional or Islamic. They'll be drawn to you. And at a very basic level, Islamic finance and Islamic banking requires you to provide the highest level of service. That's academic. Now we're coming into reality. There's a lot of work that needs to be done globally on Islamic banking, customer service levels, but a lot of effort's being put into it now.
Well, thank you all for your thoughts there and for sharing them with us, and thank you for your questions too. We have to wrap up this. And I love, indeed, your closing remarks there in terms of, the customer is going to win here, and the customer is driving everything that is going on in the banking industry and indeed around the world. And if that customer, be they big, small, young, old, it doesn't matter. It is about, we're in business to actually serve a customer audience and to make sure that everybody is getting what they want. Again, tremendous growth within this industry, and we look at CIS, where 1%, as I've said before, is involved in Islamic banking. So we've got 99% of our market to grow. And why not? We're not necessarily going after one sector of that community, but the expansion is there and the opportunities are there. But ultimately it comes down to giving a good product, delivering good services, being technically astute, and actually giving people what they want, and then they will be your customer. So the future of Islamic banking, very, very bright, and indeed for a lot of the banks here, I think in the UAE, we're going to see more involvement. We're going to have to wrap it up. I do want to thank you all. Just before we finish up, I would like to ask you, of course, to join us afternoon as well. We have some wonderful speakers here. We're going to take a break for lunch in just a few minutes, but after lunch we have 2 wonderful sessions. And we're also going to be really looking at a few case studies. So we're going to be seeing the people who've been there, done it, and they're going to tell us the challenges that they faced and how it actually worked out. Stuart Pan of HP will be back, and we're also going to talk to IBM and Visa and really look at that multinational perspective in the region in terms of how it's been working. The app, of course, have a look at that, make sure you use it. You can arrange to meet other people here. And again, just as the banking sector's got to become high-tech, this conference has definitely become high-tech. So make use of that. It's very, very useful, and you'll find a lot of information within there. So really, that's from us here. I think as we've seen a panel here, some challenges in the market, some news from a bank that has looked at these challenges, all of you who are managing that on a day-to-day basis, but ultimately looking at an industry that can actually continue to grow and be a great potential for people in the industry. We want to wrap it up here from Prasad. Thank you so much for being with us. Behnam as well, also Antonida. A big thank you so much for my panel. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to the Saffron restaurant downstairs where lunch will now be served.